There are moments in your professional life that you remember vividly, and one of mine is picking up the original white paper in December 2010 that said that this would all be done and dusted by 2017 and thinking that there is no way that is going to happen. And as I'm sure you all know, UC aims to replace 6 in and out of work benefits with 1, and if and when completed, it will affect 8 million households, millions more people, and roughly 1 in 3 of the working population, and we'll have to cope every month with 1.6 million changes of circumstance. So it's no surprise that it proved a challenge, and it indeed remains a huge one.
Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, a podcast with lessons for the public service. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group, and I'm joining you from Ghana land. And with me, as always, are my 2 fellow recovering public servants, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
And Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
So we have received an unusual number of requests to cover ICT scandals. Queensland Health Payroll, a Canadian example, and fewer but still some requests for success stories. What works in public policy? Bringing these 2 themes together, ICT failure and policy success, in this episode, we're tracing the story of universal credit, a reform that aimed to reinvent the welfare state in UK. Caroline, this is your rabbit hole. Take us away.
Look, before I begin, I should say that the reason I went down this rabbit hole is because in my day job, I'm involved in some big system-defining reforms where what the inimitable Kim Little refers to as high concept, high hubris reforms have come a cropper once they hit reality, NDIS being a pretty good example of that. And I've noticed how the experience of those big reforms has seemed to make it feel like the idea that we might do another big system reform feel a bit impossible. And so for me...
Or at least undesirable.
That's right. Like you're not going to get enough, what's that phrase our former leader uses? You're not going to get enough juice from the squeeze. And so I really wanted to talk about universal credit because it is one of those very big, very ambitious reforms that actually landed. And so I thought there's something to learn about here, right?
Absolutely.
So look, the starting point of universal credit is a realisation under Blair actually in the UK that like the hodgepodge of tax credits for the working poor, benefits for the unemployment, disability payments, etc., are completely bonkers and do not incentivise people to go back to work. In fact, trap people in poverty. And it's in no way what you would design if you were like, hey, I want a system that works. So that's the starting point of universal credit. And I'm going to mess this up, I know, as I talk about it, because I'm going to keep talking about it like it's a payment system. But actually, there were kind of 2 elements. One is like the payment of the benefit, but actually it was a huge reform as well in employment services. And like the fact that they did those 2 things together feels wild and ambitious as well, right? Is this
but also makes sense, like, because there's flow-ons for all of these things and one will stop being effective if you don't do the other one.
Indeed. So are we satisfied this is a big enough scale to kind of try and prove? All right. Okay.
Try us on.
All right. I will try and do it quickly because there's lots of really good books and stuff that I'm happy to refer people to afterwards. But the story starts with an investment banker named David Freud. And yes, of course, because this is a Tory, he is that Freud. In 2006, Tony Blair asked him to review the welfare...
No stories that start with an investment banker ever go wrong. Anyway, keep going. Yeah.
He delivers this report for Tony Blair on what you should do about welfare, and Blair's commissioned this. I just love this detail because he's about to hand over the premiership to Gordon Brown and he's like worried Gordon Brown won't have good ideas, and so he's trying to set the policy agenda with like an ambitious policy paper.
Anyway. Which is interesting because having just listened to Ed Miliband's podcast on Leading Today, I never realised Gordon Brown was such an engine room of ideas, particularly social policy ideas.
Indeed. But the way that he thought about social policy, and this comes up in universal credit, is like quite an old school statist way. Whereas Blair, remember, is all about incentives and unlocking the market and kind of – anyway, so Freud's conclusions are damning. Like people on benefits face absurd marginal tax rates, lose 90p or more of every pound that they earn once they start getting out. And what's more, he makes the point, I think, that had only just started to be realised that actually people being stuck on welfare is bad for them. Like actually work is good for people's mental health and happiness, and like being able to participate in the workforce is a good thing. And so maybe we shouldn't try and trap people in welfare dependency. So that's an interesting point. Anyway, the other thing he noticed is that there was no incentive for government to invest in getting people out of unemployment, right? So the kind of the job connection side was done out of the kind of departmental funding, whereas the welfare side is just like an automatic cash out the door. So every time they get savings, they cut the job programs, right? Every time there's no ability to think, oh, if we invested more in getting people into jobs, we might save money. No, none of that. So he's really hot on incentives, and he says, right, we've got this stupid system that is disincentivizing people and it's disincentivizing the department. And he hands it over to Gordon Brown, and Gordon Brown says, that looks quite hard.
Yeah.
And you're a secret Tory. I'm not super keen on what this is. And so he doesn't do anything with it. Like they just sit on it, right? Enter Ian Duncan Smith, the former Tory leader who just before the 2010 election comes out and says, this is what we should do. We should do universal credit. We should reform this system so we have a single benefit that tapers nicely and get better job stuff coming in. And I don't know if you remember, 2010 is when David Cameron forms a coalition government with the Lib Dems, with Nick Clegg. And as Jeremy Hayward says, he was super surprised when universal credit turned out to be one of the things they agreed they really wanted to crack on with in 2010. And so it gets up. And so that's where we start. That's the starting point. They have a wild, very ambitious reform. They're going to replace these benefits with a single thing. And that seems unlikely, right?
Well, one of the things I just want to draw out here is the role of key individuals in shaping big public policy moments. I mean, we've had a few in Australia as well, but I guess we're always looking for an institutional solution. But if you think about things like, Bruce Bonhady and NDIS and Gonski, Ken Henry, any number of other people, I wonder if we're and thinking about what as well about good management and good leadership at a site level, actually so much boils down to an individual who is prepared to kind of be a champion for a particular approach and take everyone with them. Are we approaching public policy wrong by making everything a departmental consensus?
Look, I just would challenge the idea. I think sometimes the names that get attached to these big policy design ideas over time, it's actually it might be because they did the review with a team and all sorts of things. Like there's a number of – I can think of a number of big reforms, and when I think of the person who was the arms and legs who negotiated for them to happen, they're not the person whose name it is at the top of when people Google or reference it.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think you're right. I mean, what's the old –
I just think there's something about a lightning rod that people can kind of
it's not about the making it
coalesce
happen.
around.
Yeah, the holding on to the idea, right? Here is a vision that we can get behind. That does feel important, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. It feels it's important for there to be a few of them. So a political one, a kind of systems one, people who are here, who are for other audiences. I suppose that's what I was saying. There's the lightning rod of the idea person, and then there's the person who can explain it to the stakeholders. And so you need a little, I take your point about one person. I just think it's actually a team of people who do different things at different times.
Yes.
Because that's how these things kind of keep moving, and it also means that if that one person moves, then there's an opportunity to keep going.
Yeah. Our own payment system is pretty fragmented in a not dissimilar way to this describes. Why is it so hard for agencies to unfragment, I suppose? So a lot of the work I have done in the last couple of years was around immigration, and the visa system has to be one of the most fragmented systems. And every time that they work out that there's a problem with it, I'm generalising here, but the solution is just to create a new category rather than fundamentally revisit the challenges.
Yeah. That's such a good example, and I'm obsessed with that Abel Rizvi take on kind of the original, the origins of the current skilled migration program, right? And one of the things that struck me in that kind of what we chose 20 years ago is that there was a kind of singular conception, not of exactly what the right thing is, but it's like, here's our trade-offs. We want more population growth. We want it in this demographic. We think this is the pathway.
Yep.
And then it's kind of a technocratic tweak to get
We're
there.
pursuing nation building, and here's how you get there. Yeah.
Exactly right. And that then there is, to Danielle's point, excellent implementation around that. The thing that I think in immigration policy now is like, I wonder if actually the thing that has been lost is that real sense of what is the single vision, or what's the
North Star?
There's no North Star, right? Like It's
interesting though, because I spend a lot of my time saying this isn't a system in health. So I take you your migration and raise you a health and say, worse, you would never design this system from scratch like this with this kind of public investment in the private components of it at a really high level, completely fractured understanding as to who's responsible for what between the state and the Commonwealth, and then add in all the kind of other stakeholders and parts and providers. You wouldn't even design the professions the way they're currently designed.
So true.
And you make this argument about fundamental reform and blowing it up and starting it again. But one of the few things we have designed from scratch in the last
I know where you're going. Yeah.
So people talk about how Medicare was designed from scratch in the 80s. I'm like, no. We already had charity-run hospitals. We already had private practitioners. Like, it wasn't. The rebate system of seeing a general practitioner and a specialist was designed from scratch. But actually, it's not like we didn't have a health system before 1983.
That's true.
Which always is surprising when people say, oh, we did design it from scratch. And I'm like, no, we didn't. Yep. So the only one we have designed from scratch has turned out to require significant reiterating. And again, boring Danielle says, because design and implementation are two separate things, and if you don't implement to the vision and the design, then you're going to have to. But I think agencies find it hard to act on problems everyone sees because we are incremental in nature, right? So every system we have had, most of them have been around in some form since the Second World War. They're a layered version of this government added this government added that. And to unpick all of that, everything was done for a reason in the first place, is really, really tricky. And also, I'm just not sure there are huge rewards for it. I mean, don't we often talk about you get what you reward and all of that kind of thing? Like, if you were the person who's like, let's redesign the education system from scratch, I'm just not sure anyone would, even if you did it and even if you pulled it off, I don't know if it would be what that would mean.
Right, actually, like, it's worth saying we did do a giant system-wide move on education. And I'm trying to think what's the difference between what you're saying, which I totally agree. Like, it is, I don't think anyone should have a big idea of exactly how the system should come together and exactly what the bits are. Maybe the thing that David Freud did was he's like, we think the welfare system is for mopping things up in difficult times. And actually, what we want is a welfare system that is as easy as possible for people to access when they need, and as easy as possible for them to get back into work.
Yeah.
Right? So it was much less about, like, actually what is the thing and what's the taper rate. It was much more like, we need to look at this problem differently and reconceptualize and get a kind of new North Star. And similarly with education, right, what happened is we went from a place where we were like, every kid deserves an education, to an idea that says it costs different amounts to educate different kids, and every kid deserves the same standard of education, which is revolutionary, right? Like that is an absolutely gobsmackingly different conception of education in of schools, right? So I think like it's a good refinement. It's not about what the problem is. It's like why don't we reset our vision and our kind of problem statement for what something's trying to do more often? And to your point, like it's hard.
And we often just don't have a common language. And so that's the other hard point of getting a North Star. Like when I was looking at some of your prep materials, some of the words I was having to re-up, and I'm just trying to see if I can find it, but some of the words I was having to kind of like, hang on, what do we mean by it's a tax incentive because there's no tax on welfare? And I'm like, oh, okay. And so just we don't even have I think Amanda Vanstone was talking about when I was telling her about family tax A and B. I'm not sure if it made it into the pod. I think it did. And that I always wondered why that was in the welfare system, and she said it was international accounting rules. That changed the language around it, the fact that changed what it meant to people. It became a welfare, not a tax credit. Yeah. And we don't have a common language all the time, or when we're doing the North Star part of it. I mean, you just threw out some statements like work is better than not work. Both the language and the concepts are not necessarily kind of I think there's much more there are some areas like everyone should see a doctor when they need to or something that are the language is more uncontested and the concepts are less political or something.
So like two responses to that, and I really think this gets to it. One, I think we find it hard to say the visions because when you change your North Star, you're going to be prioritizing some things over other things and people don't like it, right? Like I saw you jag on work is better than not work, but I would point you to all of the really epic social science evidence that shows that connection to the workforce and participation in some form of meaningful activity, usually paid work because that's how we do it in our Western societies, is massively important for well-being and health and all of the things.
Connection and contribution is better than neither.
And I have said that. I mean,
of course I know you do. I know you think that.
So I suppose what I would say to that is the number of people who still say to me that the thing they can remember from the Gillard government was the changes to
the single mum
single parent kind of requirements to work. And so it is a very contested – I mean, so I don't disagree with you, but I would say there are more than just our voices in the world sometimes, and it's a contested area.
Of course. And that's what's so radical, right? So David Freud says this thing to Labor, but it's Blair and he's a bit like that. Gordon Brown ignores it. And then he gets brought in. I mean, this is one of the great strengths of the UK system. He then gets made a peer in the House of Lords and they bring him in to make him the Tory minister for the next 10 years and he can just do it. Like, can you imagine being able to say, actually, you brilliant person, I'm going to make you a member of the Senate and you can go be the minister? How amazing.
So we've got off on a bit of a tangent. Bring us back on the pathway of universal credit, Caroline. Back down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay. So just quickly, I guess like the thing about universal credit as it was sold to Ian Duncan Smith, who's the incoming Tory Secretary Minister, who says, I will only join your cabinet, David Cameron, who had, of course, knifed him previously. I will only join your cabinet if you let me lead welfare reform. If I get David Freud, right? But he says, he's all over it because it seems so simple. We're going to replace roll up all these benefits and make it one, and everyone's just going to have a nice little taper that when you earn an extra $1, you just lose, like you can imagine how simple it seems. Simple is good, right? Let's just say that no good plan survives contact with the enemy, and instantly, of course, it isn't simple. Because they instantly start carving out particular payments that are a bit politically problematic. So childcare benefit, for example, Daddy-O doesn't make it in because for all of these reasons, because they're like, oh, but middle-class mums get the child benefit. Middle-class mums get that. They'll be very unhappy if that changes. Council tax subsidies, free school meals. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And sometimes it's because it's politically hard and sometimes it's because it's out of different departments, like free school meals is out of education. Anyway, so they don't get everything. That's a thing. They also, some poor person wrote a very bad incoming government brief and said that the IT would be really easy to do and so we should be able to do it really quickly. Anyway, turns out not that.
There's the policy levers and I'm just waiting for you to tell me Like, seriously, I'm like, cool, great, we've solved the policy purism problem. How are they going to build an IT system to do this and transition to it?
Well, and not just build an IT system. So remember, the Tories get in a coalition government and everyone thinks it's going to fall. Like, they all think that coalition will not last. And so everyone's trying to do things not just in the 5-year term, in the 2-year term that they think has going for them. So Ian Duncan Smith, or IDS as I'm going to call him now because that's what everyone calls him, IDS is like, right, the only way we can do this if it starts delivering by 2013. So he sets this insane deadline. And the public servants go, oh, sure, yes, Minister, we'll definitely do that. Lies, total lies. Anyway, so just to say, not as simple as it was. That is part 2 of this story, is that what starts simple always ends up more complicated.
And so, was that avoidable? Or was it inherently... I don't know either. I don't think so, is actually my gut instinct based on knowing only what you have told me in the last 20 minutes about this and having done no other research into universal credit. Sometimes those ideas that seem really simple on the face of it are inherently so complex that, as you say, surviving contact with the enemy was just... it was never going to play out the way they imagined.
I mean, there were options here that obviously were discarded along the wayside. There was a option to pilot. There was an option to
we'll get there. They do that, by the way.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So the thing about this deadline thing is that's the point at which the dreams start falling away. And it's always that. It's like, well, we were planning on doing X and then, of course, the minister wants it by Friday as opposed to in 3 months when you can do it properly. And so all of a sudden it shrinks really quickly to meet the deadline. But the thing about this is that these systems are really interconnected. And so, it's trying to solve too many problems, but I just admire the chutzpah and the dream of attempting to solve interconnected problems instead of making a change in one line agency or one whatever that's just going to create pressure or in some other one. I think that I admire the kind of get up and go about it, but I'm dying to find out what they have next.
So you've been senior government leaders. What's the opportunity and risk when your minister has a big idea and it's the right big idea? They want to change something that does need changing, but have a time frame that's not achievable. How would you approach that and try and strike that balance between taking advantage of the opportunity to make change while it's open to you?
Yeah.
Without killing it.
So, 2 different thoughts on this. One, I think there's something about, well, I guess it's if it's the big idea or not. If it's the big idea, then it's about staging the reform, not the ambition, is a line that an excellent listener of ours called Gabby Berman says a lot in relation to ECEC reform, and so shout out Gabby. And I think that is a thing. I also think there's something about when your minister has a big idea and it's not all of it, there's something about sort of thinking, well, the North Star is here and that gets us to the moon, which is presumably closer than the North Star in my tortured analogy. How do I make sure that the moon is on the road to the North Star? How do I make sure that whatever I build contributes to what the North Star would be? And I think about that in the context of, we have autism inclusion teachers in South Australia. And do I think they are the whole answer? No, I do not. But do I think it's a great idea about stop trying to fix the children and instead try and fix the systems in which they operate and give educators space and time and capacity to do it? It's great, right? So then I killed a whole other program and just piled heaps of money into that because it was make that work. I think that's the kind of flexibility that a senior leader could and should have. Maybe?
Yeah, and it's more often than not, that is more often than not how we do government, because it is complicated and there are lots of stakeholders and we don't like to make losers. So to be able to take an ambitious minister from where they want to go to something that can actually be like out the gate, really making a difference in 5 minutes flat, is also satisfying. So, I mean, if we all lived in the big reform all the time, government would kind of grind to a halt. Most of it is taking the big idea and finding ways to scope it so that you can start it. And also I've been a part of some of those that have then been built on over time.
Yes.
In an extraordinary way that created a whole new system just quietly. And I mean, this is the big question about Australian policy reform is, tax reform is such a big one as well, where like we don't do very well at the massive reforms. So public servants get very, very, very good at trying to kind of step out one
incrementalise
piece at a time. Yeah.
But you just have to have the big thing in your head, right? And that's why I think David Freud did a brilliant job in this, because he was asked to compromise on lots of things and he was like, okay, I give up on council tax, right? Like I can see dealing with 170 whatever is too hard. It's enough if I can get the disability, it's like having a sense of what is enough to get you towards your big idea is
and
like
this
a very
is what I mean about
can
the
be
one
rolled in
person
later, right?
Exactly. Once you've proved you can do it.
But also this is what I mean about the one person thing, right?
Agreed.
Like obviously he's not the only one doing all the work, right? But you do kind of need a single, someone with the driver's keys in their hands.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you know actually who has performed this role on the fix-up of NDIS has been Minister Bill Shorten until recently, right? Like someone who is holding in their head, like, I know what good looks like. I know I've got to make a whole bunch of trade-offs along the way. I've got to disappoint people but like he's got the end point in his head. And when you're in a room with someone like that, I've sat in a room with him, with Bruce Bonner-Haiti, with Julia Gillard actually on education, you feel confident that even though things you don't like might be happening, that where you're going is worth it.
Yeah.
And we don't see enough of that anymore, I think, is one of the main things.
Agreed.
Even an articulation of where you're going is like big step in the right direction. The other thing I was going to say before you take us back to universal credit, no, it was like, on the incrementalisation versus the big idea. I mean, the other challenge as a senior government leader in those scenarios when that's what your minister is giving to you is ministers seem to be obsessed with the idea that there is low-hanging fruit. And I'm like, mate.
Dude, the guy before you got that.
It's all picked. It's gone.
Oh, bless.
And low-hanging fruit often means free or within existing constraints, and that everybody will love it. And like there ain't that many things that are free and that everyone would love. And if there is,
that we haven't already thought of and done them. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. It's so true.
We're not that lacking in creativity. Anyway, Caroline, why don't you keep taking us on the story of universal credit?
Okay, so big vision, slightly, simplicity undermined. I guess the thing to say is it then hits reality, which is a public service that's A, just coming out of a very long period of labour, B, getting big departmental savings in. We talked about this before. And it turns out a public service, I think, that had the wrong tools and the wrong mindset about how to do this, because they really started it by saying, right, what we need to do is we need to build a new system, a new payment system. We don't do IT in the Department of Work and Pensions anymore because, that's not us anymore. So we're going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to some private ICT contractors. IT people, we're going to get them. And Cabinet Office, in their infinite wisdom, Alison, as our Cabinet Office stand-in, you can be the annoying person in this, are like, yes, it's very important that you do this properly. So we are going to impose major project controls like gateway reviews. And my favourite, they have to review the payment invoices before DWP can pay them to the ICT contractors.
Man, someone was frightened of a scandal, weren't they?
Right? All of this.
I do actually value a gateway review. I think there's a lot of merit in that process. But I wouldn't review an invoice.
Well, you are not like your UK colleagues. And, a requirement for kind of detailed business plans to unlock the next thing, But of course, because they couldn't do that and they didn't do that, instead you got this little drip feed bits of money to build random bits of things that you could get up, right? Oh, well, we're going to need one of these. We're going to need one of that. Needless to say, that wasn't successful, and I'm happy to take you through the ways in which it wasn't successful, perhaps.
Go on.
I mean, I can guess some, but keep
do you want to guess? Have a guess, Daniel. In what ways might this process not have been successful?
Well, no. I wouldn't tell it. I'm just listening to those like approval reviews and thinking, oh my God, the meetings, the pieces of paper going around, everybody thinking as long as I move the paper, I'm on top of the project. Like.
So they get to kind of 3 years in and it becomes clear that they aren't going to meet their 2013 deadline for having a system to roll out at quite some scale. They'd always planned on piloting, but they get a system to roll out in 4 offices. 4, count them, 4 of about 10,000, 4 offices in northwest England. And to get those 4 offices, they've spent £425 million on the systems to date. And they start going before these parliamentary committees, which ask them things like, what's the overall plan?
Surely the Cabinet Office process was designed to not end up with a figure that big and an implementation that small. Anyway, continue.
Indeed. But no one can point to a plan. No one can kind of point to the blueprint. I mean, like, what is the blueprint we're working to? They get an audit office review where they discover that within, I guess this must have been within DWP, not Cabinet Office, they've got like the personal assistant of someone exercising the kind of online delegation to approve payments of invoices up to £8.7 million. Like, there's no controls over the expenditure. There's no way of knitting it together. And fundamentally, what happened is they had not designed a thing that was going to be able to meet the needs of most of the clients, right? So like there was nothing that would work. So when
clients being people or clients being bits of the system? Clients
being people.
Okay.
So they go to trial it and it's like you remember in Robodebt where they have the bit where they pilot it without the computer? It's sort of like that. So you go along and you say to the person, I want to enroll in a universal credit, and they say, great, here's a checklist on paper of all the things. No, you can't apply because your circumstances are a bit too complicated. You are not a single man who's unemployed in your 30s. But if you are a single man unemployed in your 30s, we're going to do the form that maybe one day will be online, but it's going to take us 3 weeks to do. Like, it's one of those, right? Like, it's just a complete shit show. And at the same time, IDS is saying to Parliament, is saying to everyone, everything's fine. We're on track. We're totally going to be delivered by 2015. So disaster.
You've stunned Danielle and I into silence.
So good. £425 million.
I mean, that's where I went quiet. I mean, you haven't stunned me into silence that this got here because it was all just kind of heading in this direction. Not enough time, not the right people. Like the gap between the vision and the next step was kind of there, but it's the scale of and this is the thing, like scale in some places like welfare. Oh, defence.
Yeah.
But anything with, ICT systems, like the idea that you have to write them off, like, it's not the same as writing off half a year's of policy office work by some EL1 somewhere. Like, the scale is enormous.
Yeah.
But we've all been there, right? We've all been in a situation where we thought, oh, God, this thing,
it's really ugly.
It's not going to work. It's going wrong. It's spending too much money. We're worried about the direction. We're throwing good money after bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I've often told the story of how I stepped in midway through a funding reform, which, despite doubling the amount of money we put out, managed to annoy literally everybody in the system and make people much angrier at us than when we started putting that amount of money out into the system. Like, yeah, we've all been there, and you just look at it and you're like, holy dooly, this has got bad process, this has got bad ICT, no one's clear about what actually we're trying to do with this. How do I fix it?
Well, and is the only fix the Renee Leon fix? Do you just kill it?
Just turn it off.
Turn it off. And is there a fix that's available to us and to our listeners as like variously more junior and more senior people within the public service too, as they see these things going poorly? You know,
I mean,
you can raise a flag, but what does that mean? How do you meaningfully keep the train on the rails?
So maybe I'm taking leave of my senses tonight, but the idea is still really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And our social contract with the people is about kind of honesty and transparency and trust and faith in us.
Mm-hmm.
And I would kind of be inclined to show them everything in a very proactive way and say, this can still get somewhere, but it will be the kind of trickiest thing we've ever done.
Yep.
Will you stay with us? Like stakeholders in an organised sense, the people in a social contract sense.
Yep.
Because like we've spent a lot of money already. Like this, I think the Renee Leon turn it off is where there's that kind of different type of failure.
Yeah, you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, whereas I think it's that thing where like when you're a quarter of the way there or however you define it and it's still good, but it was harder than you thought.
Still a good idea, but hard to do. I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to get permission.
Yes, and not just from your boss, right?
God, no.
Like you really have to. In fact, Alison's like, I've never got permission from a boss. Yeah, you have to get permission.
Shh.
You're your own boss now, Alison, so we can say that. Yeah, you have to. You're so right. You have to go and do the hard work and make that case again. And this time I think it's almost easier because people have such low expectations of your next step, which was certainly my experience in my particular funding reform, that like anything I did was going to be better than the thing.
Because sometimes we spend so much time and we still scrambling around trying to fix it, not tell anyone.
Hide the problem. Make sure no one notices that everyone is annoyed.
I'm just
because it's such a political free kick.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you have to be willing to like withstand that or have a sufficient parliamentary and approval majority to be able to say, yeah, look, it has cost a lot more than we thought.
Yeah.
And it's not quite
Requires
working.
very confident ministers, right?
Yes. And also I think
not just brave in the yes minister sense.
No. And I'm thinking in this particular case, it was almost easier because not just because of the coalition agreement, which kind of locked them into it, but also because of IDS's personal agreement. Like you rolled me, but I've come back to your cabinet to deliver this thing. I have moral authority on this question. And that was really important, I think, in holding the line, even though he'd been fibbing to Parliament. I don't know whether he was fibbing or misled, that like, oh, it's all on track. He's the one who had to turn around to say, not all on track, but I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big call to say it's not working, but we're going to try and rescue it.
Yeah. But that's the call that they made. And so we're saying so. David Freud, as the minister, works very closely with Treasury in particular, who are an incredibly constructive force in this world and recognise, for example, that it's not helpful to have Cabinet Office reviewing the toilet paper expenditure. And they work very closely with Cabinet Office.
I don't know. They spent £500 million. Maybe sorry.
Well, because I was thinking, how do you get to a point where Cabinet Office are reviewing the invoices? And it's because someone's worried that they're going to just throw good money after bad. But I guess how are the people reviewing the invoices equipped to make that decision is my question.
Well, that's right. Like, unless they're fibbing on the invoice, right? Like, unless they're saying, I worked hours I didn't. Like, who knows what the invoice, how that contributes to the outcome of the thing. They'd gone on a cost plus contract, which is their own foolish procurement process. Just the head shaking that people won't get on the podcast, but just to say, Alison and Danielle are like, what?
Fixed costs every time.
And payment on basis of outcomes. Anyway, they had not done that. But so Freud goes and makes partnerships with Cabinet Office, with Treasury. There's a digital government service who are kind of like the bright spark people who've got a completely different way of starting this that isn't, procure each element towards a blueprint. It's like an agile start from the ground, build out. And he builds a consensus around that idea and manages to keep it going.
Hooray!
Well, let's see whether it lands.
So we will return to talk about how they turn it around in the next episode. Before we go, we'd like to thank Alice Tudhope for her terrific engagement with the Westminster Tradition podcast on LinkedIn. You have won a mug. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.